entrepreneurial at a group level. It's Octopus who funded Octopus Energy, which is now a unicorn in its own right, meeting brilliant founders and investing in them very, very early. So one of the guys on the talent team did 500 engineer hires at DeepMind. It wasn't a slam dunk. And back in the day, Tessian were called Czech recipient. As the director of GCHQ for a very long time, was our chairman. Series C, we've got Massive Labs, Risk Ledger. Yeah, there's definitely, there are some really, really strong companies in there. I just absolutely love the pre-seed stage. Like Europe's got talent. They're skipping the seed round and going straight to Series A.
Today, we get to speak to one of the most accomplished pre-seed investors in all of Europe, Kirsten Connell. Kirsten was the 4th employee at Seedcamp. She then left to run Europe's first accelerator focused on cybersecurity companies, which invested into giants like Tessian. And now, at Octopus Ventures, Kirsten runs their first Czech fund, which invests £100,000 into 25 pre-seed startups each year. It's a fantastic episode. Let's get stuck in. But just before we do, let me introduce this week's sponsor of the OpenVC Podcast, Intercom.com. Intercom help founders by making your customer service 24/7. Through their use of innovative AI, you can answer 50% of your customer needs instantly. Intercom is offering 1 year free if you use the code OpenVC, all in caps, at the checkout using the link in the description below. And let's get back to the episode. Hi Kirsten, welcome to season 1 of the OpenVC podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. How are you today?
Good, thanks, and thanks for having me.
I'd like to understand when you first entered this crazy world.
Yeah, gosh, for me, I feel like the beginning was a long time ago. So I started my career by pure chance and luck. I didn't really know what venture capital was, but I got this role within a really small VC. It was a sustainable technology fund called eSynergy. They had a really active angel network, and they were looking for someone to come and match founders to meet these angels and ultimately get funding from them. And so that's my role. I very quickly discovered this love for speaking to founders, understanding their vision, and then on the flip side, speaking to angels who'd often built really successful companies and learning more about what were they excited by, where did they want to invest, and then I could help do some smart matching, help founders refine their pitches to these angels. I was sort of so invigorated by this world that I was lucky enough to discover that I never looked back after that.
Perfect. I can really relate to that. When you speak to a top tier founder, they're energizing. They're trying to combat so much, and they've just got this energy that can break through so many walls. It's a great space to be in when you're around the right kind of people. So you got a taste for it at eSynergy, and then you quite moved into Seedcamp as Seedcamp's 4th employee, which is really early, and they've gone on to become an absolute juggernaut in this space. What gave you the conviction to join Seedcamp so early on in its journey?
Wow, gosh, this is really going back to, I think I joined Seedcamp in 2010. And to be honest, there's very little else out there. Not that that's why I picked them, but they really were the YC of Europe. And there truly wasn't anyone doing what Seedcamp was doing in Europe at the time. And so I was just, again, really lucky to meet the 3 full-time employees at Seedcamp really early on their journey. They were Fund 1, was a tiny fund, a couple of million, but they just had this phenomenal vision, which was Europe's got talent, and talent can come from anywhere. And let's not sit in an office in London and wait for these founders to come meet us, but let's get out there. And so, it was almost a 6-month interviewing process. It definitely was not easy. They were incredibly selective. There were lunches, case studies. In hindsight, I think looking back, they've sent me a case study on a Saturday night and expect the answers back on a Sunday. In hindsight, I think that really should have given me an insight into how hard they worked. Always on it. But I think their vision was spot on. I think they got an awful lot right in identifying just fantastic founders and having that early conviction and being that first money in. And so it was actually a really easy decision to go join them. And, they've gone on, as you said, to create an incredible portfolio, an incredible network. They call it Seedcamp Nation now. It was such a fantastic experience, and I got so fortunate to join them. I sort of be a small part of that journey.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. In terms of your roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
what were you helping out with so early on at Seedcamp?
Yeah, well, as a small team, I mean, we all really mucked in, rolled up our sleeves, did everything. But I would say a lot of my role was very much getting out there across Europe. So we had this tiny little office, tiny. When I say tiny, there was 4 desks back to back. I mean, you almost couldn't lean backwards or you bump into the person behind you. So we were in this tiny little, almost like cupboard room. And the mission was, let's get out there. And so part of my role was we would map out in Europe, where did we think the up and coming sort of hubs were for talent, and let's just go there. Let's meet people on the ground, and let's meet local tech journalists, mentors, founders, investors, and let's sort of curate this incredible network, which would ultimately lead us then to meeting brilliant founders and investing in them very, very early. So my role was hopping on a plane, and I think after 5 years when I left, my job title was general manager, but after 5 years when I left, I sort of did this wrap email, and I think I'd calculated like on average in a year, we'd go to 20 different cities. And that's not just attending events, that's hosting them. You know, we would do this epic annual trip to the US every year where we'd take portfolio companies to New York, Boston, San Francisco, and the Valley. We would do, back in the day, what we called Seedcamp Week, where we would invite sort of 20 of the companies that we had invested in, and we would blitz them with mentors. And this would be from sort of morning to night. A founder would have this sort of like 45-minute rotation where they'd have 5 or 6 mentors around the table, and they're brainstorming, you know, go-to-market, the messaging, product roadmap, raising investment. And so my role amongst all of that was to sort of identify where should we have a footprint, sort of help manage this mentor network, and help run these sort of events where we would either meet founders to invest or really help the portfolio companies once we had invested, sort of, you know, skyrocket their growth just through.
Wow, that's a lot of work, and
it
sounds like you're incredibly busy.
Sometimes people will just assume like, oh, can I meet like your Seedcamp person in Stockholm or Seedcamp person in Estonia? And we're like, no, it's just us. It's just the 4 of us. So yeah, we covered a huge amount of ground.
Amazing. Okay. When it comes to founders picking mentors and having a good relationship with their mentors, you must have seen a lot of people making good partnerships and also bad partnerships. Are there any like best practices that you suggest founders follow when they're looking for that type of mentorship today that could help?
Yeah, I do think learning from others, learning from your peers is just such a no-brainer for a founder, right? It can be a really lonely journey, and just getting outside insights is really valuable. And so in terms of some tips, I mean, I don't know if it sounds a bit like brutal, but we used to score our mentors. So after every event, we would send out a quick survey to the founders, and we were adamant that founders had to fill it in. You know, who were the good mentors? But it wasn't necessarily who just told you what you wanted to hear, right? Because it's very easy to sort of just nod and agree. Whereas, you know, it can be really challenging. So sometimes founders might score a mentor badly, so to speak, but, you know, we would have the scores from maybe 19 other founders and historical data. So we would always know, like, who are the mentors who are maybe more challenging, might get a bad score, but would always be invited back, because ultimately that's exactly, you know, the right approach. But that's very, you know, formulaic, I'd say. And if you're sort of meeting mentors on a more like one-to-one basis, you're probably not going to go away and scribble what score you're giving them. So I would say it's incredibly powerful. You really want to optimize for quality, though, to, you know, best use of time. I think there's a danger that you can have too many different viewpoints, and then it sort of muddies the water. So I would advise for any founder to really look at what do they need in the sort of 12 to 18 months ahead. What are the knowledge gaps? What's going to really help them? Is that a peer who's maybe 1 or 2 chapters ahead, who's, you know, if you're coming up in, you know, let's say this year you want to raise a seed round, it might be really helpful to have 1 or 2 founders who've recently done that, who can talk you through good and bad experiences. And then I guess the subject matter experts that can really help, you know, thinking about your pricing, your go-to-market, whatever it may be. But I would always ask for recommendations, and recommendations, I would say, are just aligning input and output, so that, you know, if a founder is really valuable and that's someone who actually you would love to spend 6 months talking to on a regular basis, then you can maybe start thinking about a more formal relationship.
Are there any particular founder-mentor relationships that you thought were absolutely phenomenal.
My memory with names is terrible, so I'm probably struggling to think of like any one particular match made in heaven that was transformational for a company. We've always sort of tried to enable founders to have a whole host of mentors at their fingertips is because it's so valuable. It always resulted in their next investor, their next hire, their next board member, their next customer. So we really were quite results driven in how we sort of thought about the matching and just making sure that founders would, it would really just transform their trajectory by executing better and faster ultimately. And so we were very focused constantly on like, are we putting the right people in front of these founders?
I think it's probably more realistic as well because you can't rely on your mentor too much. Like ultimately you're the founder, it's your decision.
Yeah.
You need to decide how much weight you give their opinions. And the best mentors probably make it seem like it's the founder's idea anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And the coaching style.
Yeah. Okay. So you've absolutely cut your teeth. You're working so hard at Seedcamp. You become a sector specialist at accelerator programs. And you decide to break away to create Europe's first accelerator for cyber software companies called Cylon, which was absolutely phenomenal. Could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration to create that and what happened at Cylon?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was a really difficult decision for me at the time. I wasn't thinking about moving on at all. Seedcamp really at that point was this rocket ship, and early tractions of success within the portfolio was really starting to demonstrate that, everything that Seedcamp sort of set out to do was working. And there was a real need for it in Europe as well. So the idea of going from sort of sector agnostic to cybersecurity was quite a daunting one. But I think what ultimately got me very excited and pushed me over the line in terms of making that jump was a few things. The founding team around Cylon were brilliant. The US had just incredible success in terms of commercializing a lot of cybersecurity companies, as did Israel, but the UK were perhaps lagging behind despite like the incredible heritage we have in this space. So, I think some sort of sectors can maybe seem a bit gimmicky or a fad, or they come and go, trends come and go. I really got on board with the belief that cybersecurity was here to stay. It was an absolute necessity, and it was only going to get more and more important, as more tech companies were being adopted. And I believe with the thought process that, we could launch many more successful companies. A cybersecurity company, probably their product, an MVP does need to be quite robust because typically they're selling to an enterprise customer. There were typically, again, like very, very broadly speaking, cybersecurity founders tend to be very technical and maybe lacking a little bit more of that commercial go-to knowledge, know-how that would just increase their chances of success. So I did believe that if you build a very strong cybersecurity accelerator, you could create more successful companies in this space. And I then also had to believe that could we have such a unique value proposition to the founder that they would ultimately choose to come to Cylon over the likes of any other brand accelerator name. And the reason I thought we could do that is because ultimately you'd need a bit of know-how when speaking to a cybersecurity company. And so I thought, right, if we bring true experts together, both on sort of a customer standpoint, but also an investor standpoint, the companies would come. The second thing that it also really played on my mind was at that point, Seedcamp was on a roll, the network was huge, and I was quite excited about building something from scratch without a brand name. Could we build something really meaningful in this space? And that was a bit of a personal challenge, which I actually relished. And so I sort of felt that it was a good opportunity to try something a little bit new, but still building on all the strong foundations that I had learned whilst being at Seedcamp.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you. So a founder that joined Cylon, what are they receiving? It's a 3-month accelerator program. You're trying to upskill them as fast as possible. And then there's a demo day at the end?
Yeah, exactly. It was like the typical acceleration program that you would imagine. And I spent a lot of time interviewing founders, like what would you want? And then looking at successful models like YC in the US. And I think cybersecurity founders, they were laser focused on, they wanted two things. They wanted access to potential customers and to access investors. And then because it's within cybersecurity, it actually made my job so easy. So they were all looking to sell to like one particular profile. Again, speaking very broadly, it was all the CISO, so the Chief Information Security Officer. Now, we quickly discovered, and we had some fantastic names involved in Cylon. So for an example, Sir Ian Lobban, who was the director of GCHQ for a very long time, was our chairman. So if you're reaching out to CISO of any sort of, tier one organization, sort of naming some of the people involved in our program, saying that we're meeting the most cutting edge founders innovating within cybersecurity, and would you maybe come along to mentor for half a day or join our demo day? That was actually a really easy pitch to them, because part of their job, they want to learn about, okay, what are the new innovations happening within my sector? So then you could quite easily bring in, let's say, 20 CISOs, and then we would have maybe 8 to 10 startups and do some really great matching. And so in terms of, what did we bring? Yeah, it was this modular approach, which I suppose is quite standard across any company. Like, how do you think about your messaging? How do you think about your go-to-market? How do you think about your core team? How do you think about fundraising? But then we would make everything quite focused to B2B enterprise. And then we would just bring fantastic people from the network in and sort of let the magic happen. Yeah, and they got an office space, they got some funding, and yeah, ultimately they were part of a really good network. Yes, I think it was good.
It definitely was, and we'll come on to the portfolio returns in a second.
Yeah.
But I think just an overall comment then, going narrower, so going from sector agnostic at Seedcamp to actually really narrowing in your focus and becoming a specialist within cybersecurity, enabled those networking effects to become even stronger, because you're fostering deeper connections into the space and actually adding perhaps more value to those startups that join the program. So that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned a few huge names that you had on board. On a personal level, did you spend much time upskilling or training from the sector agnostic talent that you had at Seedcamp to actually being able to do more on the technical side of due diligence for?
Yeah, this is a great question. I guess the reason I'm smiling was I always felt like a bit like a fraud. And so often I'd be asked, because I was like MD of Cylon, come join the cybersecurity panel, you're the cybersecurity expert. And the team sort of laughed at me like, you are really not the expert. And I really never was. Now, of course, I did my utmost best to upskill. I would chat to so many of the prospective customers and glean just so much practical insight in terms of how do they think about purchasing new software? What's their procurement process look like internally? Are they inundated with similar propositions? Are they looking for more like an orchestration layer? So I would learn as much as possible, both on sort of the customer side, the investor side, but I was absolutely not an expert. This is why I hesitated if I was the right person for the role to start with, because I did say it was Alex von Zomeren, who was at the time was at Amadeus, but he'd also built and sold Encipher, fantastically successful encryption company. And I said to him in the early discussions of would Cylon be a good move? I said, but I'm not a cybersecurity expert. And he said, but that's the beauty of it. He was like, cybersecurity experts love nothing more than talking about the very technical detail. And that's not typically where they need help. They need someone who's a bit more of an outsider, who won't get too enthusiastic about this or that product feature, but can think more about, okay, you can sell it to a CISO, but can you distill your messaging to make it so simple that actually the CFO will sign off on this? So he always saw it a bit as my secret weapon that I wasn't an expert, and so I'd maybe just lean on that.
You definitely have to call yourself an expert, because one of the portfolio companies that you led an investment in was Tessian, which was an absolutely phenomenal company. And I'd love to learn a little bit about how you discovered them, what the journey was like.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned Tessian. There are some other fantastic companies that came through, but Tessian is the flagship company. In the selection process, we would have some large cybersecurity enterprise companies. We'd have a CISO on our IC selection. We'd have some experienced VCs as part of it. One of the first things we probably got right was a very holistic approach to, do we believe this founder has the capability of building a venture scalable company? Is there a real need for their product? We would get that insight from the sort of CISOs who sat on our IC. And then did we believe that they were receptive to sort of learning? Because there's absolutely no point going through an accelerator, meeting a ton of mentors, if you were just not that person. There was definitely some things we were looking for. I think what really stood out with Tim, and he had two co-founders, was this term, complete finisher. They were so laser focused. They had each in their own experience identified this challenge, and it was such a simple one. And it comes back to sort of articulating what you're building and why, which was basically, you can have all the cybersecurity products in the world if you're a large enterprise, but yet it's still so easy either by mistake or deliberate, to send an email to the wrong person and leak very sensitive information, if you're working on an M&A deal or an investment or whatever that may be. And so, you really don't need to be an expert to identify. Everyone's had that moment where they sent an email and they're like, oh God, didn't mean to send that, and quickly follow up. So no, it was such a simplistic idea, which you could immediately see their, market would be huge, and they were a very credible team to build this. And then coming back to my sort of complete finisher comment, Tim and his co-founders were relentlessly focused. They would show up on time. They would follow up with every single mentor. They were just so diligent, so reliable. They came across with great gravitas. I think if you're selling cybersecurity product, you can't really be the hipster or like you're a bit cool. You do need to be quite professional, reliable, and sort of give the impact that whilst being a really small company, you can definitely serve a huge customer base within these large enterprises. So I think they were definitely the right sort of persona. And then I'd say just the final point, I think Tim Sadler, the founder, was excellent at this. He really galvanized, he hired very well, and galvanized his team so that, and we watched them scale. They actually sat in our office for well over a year. And so we saw them going from sort of 3 people through to maybe about 15 by the time they left. Everyone was so invigorated. He really shared the story, the trajectory, the vision exceptionally well. And I think, especially within cybersecurity, that couldn't be quite hard to get people very, very excited. But yeah, he was fantastic at that.
Was it clear then that Tessian was going to be an absolute rocket ship? Was there loads of investor interest at that stage, or did it take a bit longer?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Sort of looking back throughout all my experience of being fortunate to work with really successful scale-ups or unicorns, I'd say more often than not, and I think it was the same for Tessian's case, it wasn't a slam dunk. And back in the day, Tessian were called check recipient. And again, as I said, I love to get feedback from mentors and potential customers that we brought into the office. It was so easy on the lift down to be like, hey, who was your favorite? What interesting conversations did you have? Tessian was called check recipient, which was very much, that email, check the recipient of who you're sending it to. Some people were, it's a feature. Is this a standalone company? So, there was still, a healthy proportion of the people who couldn't quite see that it was going to turn into this absolutely hugely successful company. And that's very consistent, I would say, with a lot of the companies that in hindsight, it just seemed so obvious, so simple, but actually at the time, it's still hard, right? It's really hard. And so I suppose that's always been my biggest lesson for founders in terms of, the resilience and the drive that they need, because it's more often than not, they're going to run into hurdles and having to sort of convince people that, they have got this vision and it can be a really huge, valuable company and to take a chance on them. That's probably also partly why they renamed themselves Tessian, to be less like a feature. And then I guess, the rest is history. They went on to exit to Proofpoint and very successful.
Yeah, and they weren't just the only huge exit so far. Dig Security sold to Palo Alto Networks for hundreds of millions. Yeah. There's several in your portfolio that have gone on to raise sizable Series A's. So there's a lot of value to be unlocked still.
Series C, we've got Immersive Labs, Risk Ledger. Yeah, there's definitely, there's some really, really strong companies in there. And so again, I think just going back to why Cylon was set up in the first place, there is this talent, and if we do a few things right, we can unlock it. So again, I think it was a moment in time, and luckily it proved to be successful.
Okay. As an investor, how do you think about determining whether it's going to be a feature or whether it's going to be big enough to become a business on its own right?
A framework to a certain degree. And one of my hesitations, now makes it sound like I had a lot of hesitations in joining Cylon. A, the fact that I wasn't a cybersecurity expert, but B, are there enough companies that you can have, 5 to 10 complete and utter outliers within this sector? And I suppose one of the advantages that we would have with these sort of, we'd open up applications and sift through all of them, is that quite quickly then, especially if you were laser focused on cybersecurity, you would see a lot of overlap. And that immediately sort of led you to think more about, can this become a scalable company if there's just so much noise? And if there's no true mode, there's no true differentiator, then you would look at maybe some of the more established players and you think this complements a product feature that they already have versus a true standalone business that can get to unicorn status. The way we addressed that was looking at this, is this a space which isn't too crowded that companies can innovate?
Yeah, competition's fierce. It
Yeah.
becomes a price war. The ability to have pricing power gets eroded. And then how are you going to have sell for a big multiple when you have no profit margin?
Yeah, exactly. And then it just, the first mover advantage is a tough one to bank just on execution alone, I think is a really tough one. So yeah, you're definitely looking for a bit more of a differentiator there.
I like it. I like it. And I think one of Peter Thiel's favorite quotes of mine is competition is for losers, which is a really surprising quote to a lot of founders because they face a lot of competition. His point is investors don't like it when you have competitors. So try and find things where you don't have to compete in
Yeah,
price at least.
if you're truly innovating fast, like there's an education piece that can slow you down. And this is why I love propositions that are just simple. You think to yourself, like, my goodness, why does this not exist? It's crazy that no one has done this before.
Amazing. Okay, so you've been at Seedcamp, you've done Cylon Labs, you are probably one of the most experienced, if not the most experienced accelerator person in Europe. And now you're operating at Octopus Ventures at their first check fund. I believe I'm right in saying you do 100K investments at the pre-seed stage. What kind of things are you looking for?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think it's probably obvious from my career that I just absolutely love the pre-seed stage. I got really lucky. I had the opportunity to join Octopus. They're quite active investors at seed and Series A, but they didn't really have a fund or a product designed to invest at pre-seed and pan-European. So it's quite easy to jump in. And so what do we look for? So exactly as you just said. So we're first check fund. We operate a little bit more like an angel, but we bring the institutional support of a VC with us. We're sector agnostic, but we are looking for venture scalable companies. And so we love mission-led founders who are building, venture scale companies, I'd say. That's
Okay.
in a nutshell.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So how many investments are you looking to make a year with the first check fund?
We've already invested in just over 50 companies. On average, I'd say somewhere between 20 to 25 companies a year.
Okay, well, it's extremely active. And you said pan-European, so you're not an SEIS, EIS fund.
No. We're not a tax efficient fund. We're an
Okay.
LPGP structure, and so we can invest in pretty much any instrument. We've invested in quite a lot of Delaware incorporated companies, but often the founder will have a link back to Europe or be based here. So no, it's a very broad remit that we have.
Okay, amazing. What are the key differentiators for the first check fund versus other pre-seed investors?
Yeah.
Why should top tier founders take Octopus's money?
It's a great question. I actually went to an event 2 weeks ago. We had to do some reverse pitching. I like to think for a few reasons. A, we're really collaborative. So the average round size is just over $1 million. As we're 100K into that makes us really collaborative. And we're striving to be the most valuable money on the cap table. And luckily, a company who raised over 2 million pre-seed recently were like, oh my God, you really are. Like, you guys, like, in terms of expectation, I feel that he was like, you deliver a lot. So there's a few things that then enable us. Being a really small, agile investment team, we can add a lot to the founders. In terms of what founders can expect from us, we've got a dedicated people and talent team. So one of the guys on the talent team did 500 engineer hires at DeepMind. His experience is second to none. Often when founders have just raised that capital, they're looking to bring on board incredible tech talent. So if they can dip into his knowledge, hop on a call, sometimes it's one-to-one, sometimes it's one-to-many, and just be like, this is my job spec. Do you think for what we're looking for, is that right? Is the job title correct? The salary, the options, where should I advertise this? How should I run my interviewing process? If you can get a lot of that right, just by speaking to someone in our talent team, that's such a huge help. So that's one thing. Another thing that we do, and we love doing this, twice a year we run a mentorship program, and everything is opt-in. If the founders are literally like, I'm busy building or I'm busy selling, I don't need your input at the moment, we stand aside and we just let them crack on. We do try and run these things like as and when it's helpful, that they know it's there for them. So the mentorship program is one of them, where twice a year we'll ask the portfolio companies like, hey, would you like to opt in? And if you do, where are the areas that you need help with? We collect those answers, then we go out to our network and we try and match it. So someone might be, I need pricing help. It might be, I want to build an advisory board, I'm not quite sure how to go about it. It could be, I'm looking to enter the US market and love some advice around this. So it's often a mentor who can step in and have a call once a week for 8 weeks, typically. So there's often a subject that's like very moment in time, this is what I'd love some expertise around, or to sort of brainstorm with. Sometimes it's founder coaching, it's really wide varying. And then we'll do some really smart matches. We'll find out exactly what the founder's request is. We'll find 2 or 3 people who we think can fulfill that. We'll match them, and then they do this one-to-one mentoring for 8 weeks. We have portfolio companies who love that. And since we've invested, every single time we run a mentoring program, they're like, yes, please. And this time, this is my request. And often these mentors, sometimes they introduce them to their next investor. Sometimes they hire them. Sometimes they help them find the right hire. It's led to new customers for the portfolio. So for us, it's so valuable. And I think the fact that we're part of this wider network really enables us to quite simply productize this. A few other things I'd say: peer network. We invest at pre-seed, but we've got a really great portfolio at seed, Series A and beyond. And so that's such a great knowledge bank. I just think having that support of sharing offices, etc., is brilliant. And maybe the final thing I would just mention is helping companies find their next investor. We just have an insane database of who's investing, what stage and what traction. And so actually telling a founder when we invest, when they've got 18 months runway, like, hey, for your next round, this is our expectation of where traction should be. It just really helps founders set those milestones early on when they've got time on their side. So I think founders, again, appreciate that. So yeah, there's some of the reasons why a founder might take us.
It's a great answer, and it's all true. I think one of the biggest benefits is that you are leveraging Octopus Ventures, which is a much larger entity. You're not just a pre-seed fund. Yeah. So you've got experts at every stage of the investment cycle, and a huge, I don't know how many portfolio companies are in the whole Octopus organization, but it must be a few hundred, or maybe even close to 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge group of portfolio companies. And then even just beyond Octopus Ventures, it's really entrepreneurial at a group level. It's Octopus who funded Octopus Energy, which is now a unicorn in its own right. So, we try where possible to make introductions. Got Kraken, which is again a software company that was sort of built in-house. Yeah, there's many different, I guess Octopus is a great name. There are many different arms to the business. And we can use that either for DD or for biz dev or for mentoring. So yeah, we really try and leverage the sort of whole group when we're investing at pre-seed.
Awesome. With the mentor side of things, do you have to incentivize them at all? Are they part of the fund? How are they rewarded? Is it just goodwill? What's going on there?
It's a great question. I'm almost amazed at how willing people are to sort of give their time for free. So we don't incentivize them through any financial gain. We interview the mentors. We definitely really focus our time on doing that to just make sure everything is aligned. And often our mentors be exited founders who want to just give back. Sometimes they've been CTO of a scale-up. They've sort of witnessed all these problems. The second time around, they would have built the tech stack maybe slightly differently to enable it to scale. They've taken some money off the table, or they've got a team now and they've got a bit of time. So often I would say it's just purely the passion that these mentors have, and they find it invigorating. Sometimes they might be considering angel investing, and this is a great way to just, get to see more of our portfolio companies, build a closer relationship with us. Other times they're just interested. I think if you're a founder, we've got a lot of founders, they're always, what's new, that energy of a pre-seed company. We had and this is maybe a match to sort of speak about. We had a company who'd raised Series C round, had done the expansion to the US, had hired a new CEO into the company, and was like, that energy you get of spending time with the pre-seed founder who still got everything ahead of them. They were like, it's just unbelievable. He was like, I told my wife I'd do it one day a month, but I just can't stop myself. And now he's actually become a full-time advisor for this company that he's working with. So yeah, I would say it's very much passion which brings these mentors to our network.
I think that's the best way to do it, because otherwise there could be bad actors, there could be some misalignment of incentives. But if it's pure curiosity and you're getting energy back, you're getting ideas back, because the founder is so inspiring, then it makes a lot of sense for mentors to get stuck in. Yeah. Who might find themselves in a more cushy job now that's protected and not needing to innovate as fast as they once did.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you also really design it, A, that it's value add for the founder because you're actually building a relationship, but B, it's not too much of a time drain for the mentor. So we tested this model and it's iterated quite a couple of times, but we found 1 hour a week for 8 weeks is sort of the right cadence for both parties. You're going to lose goodness knows how many hours of your life. They're 8 hours, okay, this is quite exciting, let's give it a try. And then actually we've had about 80% of our mentors sort of volunteer for the next one. So they really love to repeat it. And running it twice a year is then also quite a clear, like, opt in or out as frequently as you want. But, the most would ever request is 16 hours a year. So yeah, we quite deliberate about sort of making sure that that request isn't too much of a heavy lift.
Okay. And if someone's listening to this and they want to be a mentor, do you find them or can they apply somewhere?
Yeah, we'd love for them to get in touch. And maybe my email is just the best way. Yeah, we're always looking to increase our mentor base. So yeah, we'd love to hear from people who think it sounds interesting.
Amazing. Okay, so just to close up then, I think you mentioned you've made 50 investments or so into the First Check Fund.
Yeah.
It's been going for a few years. I know it's still early days, but are there any portfolio companies that are already showing signs of exponential growth that are quite exciting?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm an optimist and I feel like the portfolio company is almost like an extension of my children. So I am really excited. There's obviously the scaling is slightly different trajectories, but there's absolutely, companies who've just managed to execute so well that they're skipping the seed round and going straight to Series A. We've just at the end of last year and just yesterday announced another Series A round. So fantastic traction. A handful of our companies just got term sheets. So we feel like January, we're off to a really strong start. And then some of the companies who are executing in terms of metrics have like insane ARR figures. They're just executing so well that they don't even actually need to raise. And so we've also got some companies in the portfolio where if and when they decide to go out and raise, I'm pretty certain, the best is not still yet to come, but, some really exciting companies in the portfolio. But I have to caveat all of that with it's pre-seed, it's so high risk, it's still so early. And I guess from previous experience, there are so many twists and turns ahead. So hard to predict, but I would say quietly confident.
No, that's very humble of you because, all of that momentum that you just said goes very much against what the market is seeing now with funds underwater, it being harder than ever to raise new funding. So, even having enough momentum to not need to raise external capital, but maintain exponential growth is phenomenal, and credit to your sourcing and investing capabilities there.
Oh.
A follow-on question. With the rise of AI and other trends, how do you see the pre-seed changing, if at all, over the next few years? Is there anything you're scared of or anything that you're excited by?
Yeah, this is a great question and probably the one that I spend most of my time swirling around in my head. Like, I think we're in a moment in time where I think we're incredibly fortunate to be deploying, and I think we're just going to see huge growth happen, both in terms of innovation, but also I believe in terms of large corporates adopting technology, because there's almost now this sort of awareness, like, we have to, right? There's something happening. We need to be testing it. We need to be trialing it. So I think that offers founders an incredible opportunity. And then in terms of our own investment thesis and investing, are we investing in the right stage? All these questions are front of mind. And I can't really say that I've got the exact answer. We still look at first principles when we're selecting a company, which is the characteristics of the founder and is their company transformational and a must-have. And that probably just sounds so simple, but I don't think that changes too much with AI. Of course, then you start thinking a bit more around, does this provide you with a true moat? Is it access because you can train your model better? In terms of sort of defensibility and moat or skill set from that individual, what gives you an edge that we're not going to see a tidal wave of 20, 30 companies with a really similar value proposition? And we're definitely starting to see more and more of that because we're pre-seed and we're sector agnostic. You have a really wide top of funnel, and so sifting down, we're starting to see many more of the same propositions. For us, it's easier to park that and look back down to like the founder's profile, like why are they building this company? What is their know-how that's going to enable them to make a success of it and give them, a real foot in the door in terms of getting this product in the hands of the customer and then hopefully scaling it beyond there. So I think AI plays a big role in that, but we haven't to date drastically changed how we're investing or what we're investing in. But obviously we're finding more and more really exciting opportunities coming through. And ultimately, I think my viewpoint is it's such an exciting time and just making sure that we're open-minded.
No, I love it. That's a phenomenal answer, and I agree. I think our job's actually going to get harder because there's going to be more ideas coming to market, easier, it's quicker and cheaper to get to product market fit or even just get your MVP out there. So there's going to be more choice for us as investors to find really exciting deals. And on that positive note, I'd love to say thank you very much for your time. I know we're absolutely out of time right now, so It's been a phenomenal episode. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I loved our conversation.